So my name is Peter Young, and I'm on the board of Societe de Chimie Industrielle and also head of programs. And I'm very, very pleased to welcome all of you to today's event. We have a huge number of people who registered. So our philosophy is you've picked the right topic and you pick the right speakers, you almost inevitably will have a successful event. And I think that's going to be the case here. The importance of this particular topic, obviously, is very easy to explain. I think the whole interest in green chemistry and circular chemistry is at a huge peak now because of a number of things. One is the progress of the companies that are executing new technologies and commercializing them, but also the immense pressure that is on companies to be more circular or green from that angle, but also in terms of the overall pressure for compliance with ESG rules and regulations. So this is a golden period for those companies that are successfully pursuing green chemistry and circular chemistry. And we have three very experienced executives from three leading companies that are pursuing different parts of this equation. So I want to just say that this will last for 1 hour. We're going to try to leave about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. And for those of you in the audience, the way we're going to do the Q&A is we're going to let you ask questions through either the Q&A or the chat box. And all you have to do is type in your question, and all of us, the panelists, will be able to see that. I'll apologize in advance, Carlos. I know you sent me 2 slides, and I was running from meeting to meeting, and you sent it a little bit earlier, so I have not yet opened it. So I may not be able to do it when you get to the point where you wanted to talk about your slides, but I know that you're very good at explaining things, whether you have slides or not. So I apologize in advance. So I think the first thing I'd like to do, though, is to ask each of the panelists to really just briefly describe their company, what their company does, but also their own background, what their job responsibility is. And we tried to pick 3 companies that are really looking at this equation from different angles, whether it's using biotech methods, as in the case of Genomatica, or biomass, or other, or circular chemistry, meaning taking things such as plastic waste and converting them back into chemicals and plastics. So let me ask each one of you to do that, and I'll just ask you to do it alphabetically by last name. And so Carlos, if you could take 2 or 3 minutes, describe your company, but also your role.
Great. Well, Peter, thank you very much for having me. And hello, Michel and David. It's a pleasure for me to sit with you on this panel. Don't worry about the slides, Peter. We can talk without them. They will be there for the record if anybody wants to take a look at it. So no worry there. Basically, I am the executive chairman of Genomatica. For those of you who do not know the company, Genomatica was founded by a very capable and creative CEO by the name of Christian Schilling about 20 years ago. And the company has been on a journey, fundamentally with a single purpose and a single focus from the side of what kind of chemistry to use. It's focused on biology. And it is focusing biology to use it where it makes sense. And where it makes sense to us is where we can make materials and chemicals that not only give an economic return, but they are sustainable. The company, in addition to addressing the obvious, which is to take the carbon out of the atmosphere by avoiding it to get there in the first place, also focuses very deeply on the transparency of the supply chains. I think you've been probably surprised. I'm not surprised to see that there's lots of manipulation in the markets, as well as in not only in the securities, but even in the government agency level, in having great difficulty in really addressing what sustainable and renewable is. We've been aided by large interest of the markets to do that. So that's what the company does. 200 people, San Diego, 20 years, led by inventor owner. I was very privileged to join the company about 6 years ago as chairman. Basically, I spent most of my career in the oil and gas industry. The latter part of the oil and gas industry, I decided to begin to focus on more sustainable chemistries, and I was fascinated by the power of biology. And here we are. We've commercialized a couple of processes. We'll hear more about them as we go through. I live in Northbrook, Illinois. I'm happily retired, so I managed to keep busy doing a few things that interest me. And what interests me most is making technology work, and making technology work for a fruitful and desirable purpose, which is sustainability, environmental soundness, and attacking whatever we can do on the climate change. So that's Carlos Cabrera. The most important news in my life in the last 6 months is I became a grandfather. So I have a granddaughter, which is 5 months old, and that's it. That's Carlos Cabrera in a nutshell.
By the way, if everyone retired the way Carlos tries to pretend that he's retired, the world would be a better place. That's for sure. I've known Carlos for many, many years. So, and my wife said, don't retire like Carlos does, otherwise I'll never see you. Michel, you want to talk about your company and what you do?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michel Chornet. I'm the Executive Vice President for Engineering, Innovations, and Operations at Enerkem. I've been with Enerkem for about 15 years, and prior to this, I worked 6 years with Shell Canada in different roles, as well as 4 years in the fuel cell industry. So Enerkem, we are a company that we've commercialized over the past 20 years a gasification of waste material technologies. We focus on hard to decarbonize sectors. Those are on the transportation side are SAF, aviation fuel, marine fuel, and the chemical side, also mainly olefins. We see our growth beyond 2030 being from the chemical sector. So we've been at it for 22 years. We have about 250 employees. We have a commercial plant in the city of Edmonton in which we receive mostly municipal solid waste, but sometimes it can be pure plastics or contaminated biomass in the form of telephone poles or construction demolition. We are building a methanol plant in the South Shore of Montreal with Shell, Proman, Suncor. We're building another methanol plant in Tarragona, Spain with Repsol and Suez. Should mention that Repsol and Suncor are also shareholders of Enerkem. So over the years, our platform is commercial. We've proven at the scale that we can do pure plastics or biomass or contaminated biomass or MSW. And we try to specialize for the chemical industry on what we call material upgrading. So taking the non-recyclable fraction, so the number 3 to number 7 plastics, and transforming them into olefins.
Okay. David, your turn.
Thank you, Peter. And as Carlos said, it's very nice to be on the panel with Carlos and Michel. Very honored to be with these gentlemen. My name is Dave Roesser. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Encina. I've been with Encina just shy of a year now. My background is in polymers and plastics. Lately, the last 14 years of which I spent at a company by the name of Cargill here in Minneapolis, running some of their large industrial businesses. So my job has been to commercialize new technologies and new businesses along the industrial side. Encina is about really helping to catalyze a transition to a circular economy. And so what we're doing is, and Encina is approximately 8 years old. It was started by a gentleman by the name of David Schwedel out of Miami. It's his brainchild, and he's been along for the ride the whole time. But what we're doing in Encina is taking end-of-line plastics and waste plastics that come out of MRFs and other places, and through a catalytic conversion process, turning them into base raw material chemicals. So whether that's olefins or aromatics, the chemistry can do either one. Right now, we're focused on the aromatic side, and our first plant is scheduled to be constructed in Pennsylvania and up and running by the end of 2024. So that's Encina.
Yeah. So stepping back and looking at the big picture, you know, there's so many different technologies and products and processes. You know, I think if we had a panel that represented every different technology and so forth, we'd have a panel of 50 or 60 people. But the three of you represent three of the really mainstream, you know, areas. But there are some other approaches by others that are not represented here. Could, you know, such as, you know, chemical methods for recycling, for instance, pyrolysis, or some of the bacterial enzyme inventions that they have for taking, you know, plastics and just decomposing them bacterially. Any comments, just big picture comments, basically on if you think about the leading technologies, which ones you think are farthest along and that are going to have the biggest impact? Because obviously some are much farther along in terms of feasibility than others. So your thoughts on that as you look at the big picture?
Do you want to call somebody to lead it off, or
Yeah, go ahead, Carlos.
Yeah. Well, you know, this is a very large problem, as everybody knows. You know, there's the energy sector, and there's the chemical and the material sector, and then there's the circular economy side. And I think that there's not going to be a technology monopoly. I think technology and science will go to work where it makes sense, and where it does the things that most efficiently can accomplish the job that has to be done. On the recycle side, in other words, taking existing polymers and or materials that have already been used and end up in waste, I think you have, you know, two of the leaders here that you know, have capitalized on the technologies that make the most sense. I'm lucky that I have my foot on biology where it makes sense, and I'll talk to that in a minute. And I also have my other foot on the recycle side. I think, as you know, I'm a member of the board, and I work with David Trudell at Encina. So on the recycling side, on the plastics, I think it's going to be a combination of, in the short term, of pyrolysis and catalysis, conventional catalysis. In the longer term, I think there will be certainly advances in enzymatic type of work that can be done on waste. There is a lot of work that is done on waste, et cetera. So that's where I think we see the world going, and you have some technologies which are already commercialized. I'm obviously partial, and I'm very excited about what David Trudell and what we're doing at Encina, because it solves a big problem in a big way, right? And you know, more to come. David can talk about that in a lot more detail. On the biology side, and here I'm talking only about chemicals and materials, I'm leaving out the energy sector. The biology side, I think, has a role, and has a very important role to play, where you're working on heteroatoms, which means that things that have more than carbon and hydrogen. You know, it's very selective to take bacteria and engineer it, and we learn how to scale it up. So I think in materials and you know, base chemicals to produce from synthetic and renewable feedstocks, which not only, by the way, have to be food-based, but they're from other bases. I think biology, as we have proven now at Genomatica, has a big role to play. You know, we can scale them and we can make them happen. I've left out the huge part of the decarbonization, Peter, which is the energy sector, and that's a topic by itself. So I've only concentrated on the circular economy from the perspective of waste and the materials and chemicals. So my bet is on biology for heteroatoms, high selectivity, high productivity, et cetera, and combinations of conventional catalysis and pyrolysis in the short term for the recycle of plastics. That's what I see.
Yeah, that's right. No, I think that's a good big picture summary. And, you know, one perspective is certainly that to lump everyone together is a big mistake. It really is. You have to look at each market and each technology and say, what are the economics and how advances the technology in each of the successors to pick the winners and losers. So, but there are going to be a lot of winners. But there will also be some losers too, because in some cases, maybe the technology works, but some of the economics don't work. So I think this is a case where you really have to look market by market, technology by technology, in order to assess, who are the winners and who are the losers. Any comments, Michel or David, along the same line, the big picture line in terms of who the winners are going to be, perhaps, and there'll be multiple winners, not just one, right?
The way we at Enerkem look at it, where we feel the industry needs to be a little bit technology agnostic. To a certain point, the needs are huge. The circular needs or decarbonization needs are humongous. The reality is that we all need successes in this field, so we should encourage ourselves more than anything else. But what we encourage our potential future partners to look at is, when we choose a technology, yes, there's the commercial readiness, but in addition to this, they need to look at what is the feedstock availability, feedstock sustainability, and what is the scalability that whatever feedstock strategy provides for their decarbonization needs or circularity needs. Sometimes, some of these companies are not interested in doing 200 projects to reach their goals. They would rather do 20 projects to reach their goals. So the feedstock availability, scalability is a big play also in their decision making, and that's where we tend to focus. And of course, there's commercial readiness in terms of technology, TRL, but TRL, in our view, has to be a TRL in an LC way or / circular world. It's not just about technology readiness level, it's proving at the certain commercial scale that you can get the decarbonization or circularity that the industry needs.
Yeah, that's right. David, any comments?
Just one extra comment. I mean, I think that Carlos and Michel have covered a lot of the ground already. But to Michel's point about feedstocks, especially in the plastic waste area, that's got to be developed more significantly in certain places. It's very well developed in, say, places like Europe, less so in the U.S., but it's coming to the U.S. And then, of course, in fairly large economies in Asia and other places, it's not developed at all, right? So that's another piece that we're going to have to be looking at. Overall, I agree with the consensus that it's going to take several different technologies to be able to solve this problem, right? Because we're looking at a fairly large problem, and the volumes, if we're just focusing on the chemical side, even the chemical volumes are very, very large, right? And so we've got to be able to do it at scale. Right, that's probably the critical point here, and it's going to take several different ways to be able to do that.
Yeah. In fact, David, it's almost as if you read the next question on the issue of scale. So, interesting. In my firm, Younger Partners, we work a lot in the green chemistry, circular chemistry. In fact, a couple of the people who are panelists here have been clients, and one of the things is just a math issue, right? Which is, if you look at how much, for example, single-use plastic, right? If you look at how much volume is out there, one of the big challenges is, even with the successful technologies that have gotten to a commercial stage, the real question is, can they scale up fast enough to really have a big dent in terms of really being able to materially change the mix of green chemistry and plastics for the industry? And do you agree with that? That's my personal assessment. It's just like, if you took all the really good players out there and said, let's figure out how, make sure they have enough capital to build as fast as they can, it's still the amount that of tons that they can affect is fairly limited. Would everyone agree with that? Does that make sense?
Well, from my side, Peter, I think that your assessment's correct, right? And I think Michel alluded to it's huge, right? I mean, just to be modest about it. I mean, everybody knows the trillions of dollars that all the consultancies estimate are required to do any decarbonization of significance that makes a dent, mostly in the energy sector, but for sure in the chemical sector. Our dreams are ambitious but modest. I think we focused on areas where there's economic return, because if there's not economic return, it's difficult to source the capital, unless you go to Uncle Sam or I suppose Uncle Boris in the UK, although I heard that he's being questioned now, so I don't know. So unless you resort to government, there has to be a capital return. So, our focus is where consumers reward, that's apparel, personal care, home care, packaging. We think the margins are there. Huge markets, billions of dollars of markets, and we have very specific chemicals focused there. And we modestly think we can take roughly about 100 million tons of carbon out, in a 5 to 10 year period, depending on how quickly we can accelerate. Feedstock is a consideration that has to be looked at, but the task is daunting. And it's not going to happen unless there's a diverse set of players all over the world doing it, committing to it. And, now we have, of course, a very strong tailwind from the financial sector, that's beginning to look at where they invest and how they invest. So those are the hurdles and the opportunities that I see. But in the short term, as much as we'd all like to, reduce the dependency on fossils, they're going to be here for quite a while.
One of the issues is, in fact, what you said, obstacles and tailwinds, Carlos, and that is, for a long time, no matter what process you faced at least two hurdles. One is you had to prove to the customers that the product was equivalent, right? And then the other was that for a long time, and that's changed recently, customers say, well, very nice that you have something that's green, but I'm not going to pay you a premium for it, right? But that is changing very, very rapidly. I mean, Jim Fetterling, when he recently, during an earnings presentation, talked about the fact that increasingly Dow is able to get premiums from customers because there's demand, and because their customers themselves are willing to pay a premium as well as a consumer for that. So I think you still have the problem, not the problem, but the task of making sure of product equivalency, right? Obviously, right? But the premium issue, I think, is beginning to solve itself. To what extent do the three of you see that in the individual marketplaces that you're participating? Is it a little bit, a lot? In terms of the premiums that customers are willing to pay?
Well, we at Enerkem, we don't deal with the end customer. We typically deal with the at the first step in the chemical supply chain. So what we're hearing is that they're forecasting that premiums from 2x to 3x in 2030, 2035 would be acceptable. It seems large, but when you actually break down the cost of ethylene in a water bottle with the water, it's not a lot, it's a few cents. Okay, so, but it's a complicated and convoluted supply or value chain, which the oil and gas doesn't have on the biofuel side. It's not as complicated. Mm-hmm. So it's going to take some time, but I think the industry is realizing that they need to get there. There is an ask, consumer, there is a pull. And I think the chemical industry, what we're hearing, wants to be ahead of the curve rather than having obligations like the fuel side to get there. Yeah, so I think it's happening, but it's going to take a bit of time.
David, how about you? What are you seeing? Because you're producing you can produce a certain mix of kinds of products. What are you seeing from customers that on this issue of premiums?
Yeah, Peter. So we're focused on the BTX, benzene, toluene, and xylene, right, at high yield coming out of our facility. And what we're seeing is significant premiums being signed up for long periods of time with our end customers. Part of the reason is the volumes aren't huge compared to what their overall volumes are, so they can take a risk on some of these things. And they're working with their customers, right, to make sure that they segregate, make sure this brings a value to their customers going forward. But we're seeing premiums, double what the cost of those base materials are right now. Now, to be honest, Encina is set up to do well, like in a normal market. But these extra premiums they're seeing are pretty significant, and people are willing to sign up long term for these premiums, 5-10 years, going forward, because their customers are really pulling them for these circular materials as well, right? So we're seeing pretty good support on increased values for these circular materials in the marketplace.
I know, Carlos, it's certainly the case in your world, right? A lot of your applications in personal care and so forth, they clearly are areas where, premiums are easier and there's a more pull, right, from the marketplace.
I think, Peter, there's for us, and I agree with the statements, of my colleagues on the panel. Certainly, all the points that they have raised, I think are, exactly the points to think of and to be considered. No surprise. In our side, we have an interesting, an industry in play. There's premiums where we're substituting, and of course, there's premiums where we're bringing a molecule that doesn't exist, right? So, I mean, you can imagine just, from an economics, the perspective of extracting a premium from for a renewable base, although it's a small volume, right? The premiums are very high. So in a given sector of the industry, we're synthesizing molecules that are only possible to be synthesized using biology. Conventional chemistry doesn't apply. So there, we not only realize a premium, but we realize a significant premium. Yeah. And significant premium means, many times, what would be available, should it be available, because, the basic material doesn't exist. That's true in, very specific applications in nutrition and very specific applications in cosmetics and, things of this nature. Where we're substituting, in other words, where we're substituting, bulk chemicals out in a way that, David is substituting, and, at Encina and others are substituting bulk chemicals out for existing fossils. I happen to see, through customers that the premiums are really there, and, they're significant. And the frequency of the premiums existing because of the pressure that investors are putting in all these companies, they're very desperate to source materials that come from that part. In Genomatica, we have very specifically chosen areas where a premium is possible and desirable. Although, if you take a look at our portfolio, our most significant presence in the market today is through butanediol. But as caprolactam is coming, which means nylon 6. We have a whole variety of chemicals coming for nylon 6,6. We clear an economic return at anywhere between $50 and $65 a barrel. So today, life is great, and people are regretting that they didn't do that. Of course, I've been in the oil industry long enough to know that it's cyclical. So we realize premiums, significant premiums. We have chosen molecules that are so unique and can be made economically to compete with existing fossil technology, which is, pretty much at the peak of innovation, although there can still be intervention. So it is a premium market, and consumer brands, which are aligned with the taste of a new generation and customers, seem to be ever more focused on sustainability and environmental friendliness and so forth for their end products. So they encourage us, very much to develop these synthetic routes, and the premiums are there. So I spent many years of my career hoping that they would be there, and at this point in my career or my retirement, they're there. So I'm a happy man. That's why I'm still working, Peter.
Yeah. Now, we do a lot of work with. We're doing work with a company that makes none of the three on this broadcast. That uses biomass to make certain specialty chemicals. In their case, they're targeting chemicals that are made from oil that are under regulatory pressure, right? Either toxicity or health issues and so forth. Is that a factor for the three of you in terms of sort of the market opportunity? Because certainly, for example, in Europe, they're particularly tough on a lot of the different oil-based chemicals, right?
For us, Peter, it's a very strong factor in our butanediol line, and let's give you specific examples. The conventional chemistry routes to make butanediol, are for a reality, I mean, they're carcinogenic, right?
Yeah.
So people, are very ever more hesitant to touch, a synthesis route which is carcinogenic. So if you base it on fossils, it's definitely deleterious both to health as well as to environment. If you focus on the other sources of butyl, it's really even a greater pressure. The other producers of butanediol, mainly the ones that come out of mainland China, are coal-based. So the pressure to eliminate coal as a source for the for the materials and synthesizing materials to make things like butanediol, of course, is very strong. And the coal dependency for that side of the butanediol is certainly the focus of the buyers that don't want to be associated with synthetic routes or synthesis routes that are carcinogenic in nature. And certainly I think there is a revival to really question the wisdom of producing materials which are deleterious to health that are coal-based. So for us, it's a tailwind, and I think it's a well-justified tailwind that we benefit from.
So my next question is a little bit more focused on you, David, and Encina, because it's more related to the whole recycling side and to a certain extent, Michel. So, we all know that the news media has a tendency of generalizing about lots of concepts, and recycling is not an exception. And as all of you three panelists know, there are really some very different approaches to recycling, and the economics vary by the type of plastic, by the contamination of the waste plastic with food materials, the mixing of different types of plastics, and it can vary dramatically geographically, right? Because the practices and the consumed products in Europe versus the US versus Asia can be quite different. So, David, this is something that you obviously have to live and breathe with this challenge, because you're a company that has geographic choices and choices as to where you put your plants. So, what are the challenges that the industry and Encina has to deal with over this waste plastic, and how are you overcoming these issues?
Yeah, so for us, it's a great question, right? For us, it's question number one, right? For any place we want to go to build a plant, we have to understand what that feedstock is going to look like, and is it going to be, first of all, available at the volumes that we need, and also at the pricing that we need, right, to be able to be economically viable. And so, as opposed to others that are kind of in this space a little bit, that's our first focus. A lot of people in this space, they're starting to get in this space, some of the big people getting in are very focused on the chemistry and the cracking part of it and the separation part of it. But quite frankly, we're focused on the front end first, right? Which is making sure we have those advantaged feedstocks. And so that has and is going to continue to drive what we do. And so what we're doing is we've got significant horsepower in that space. So we've got people that have been in that space for 25, 30 years who understand where these materials are, what's happening to them, where to get them, who to connect with and partner with to be able to get those materials in each of the areas that we're looking. And so that's a critical piece of our, I would say, our strategic advantage versus others in this marketplace, is to have that capability so that we can lock up these feedstocks and the ones that we need pretty readily and go forward. So in the US, what it means is we have to build big front ends, right, where we take in advantaged feedstocks and then separate out to the materials we need to go into the catalytic cracker to make those end chemicals, right? And so then in places like Europe, it's a different story, right? Because they do a much better job at separating.
Yeah, right.
Right. In Asia, there's some countries that separate very well and some that don't at all, right? And so that's a hit or miss. And some of the places in Asia we're looking at, you'd have to help develop that kind of a system over time to help provide those feedstocks, right? So I think people don't put enough emphasis on the feedstock side, right? I mean, if I look at what we're doing, the catalytic conversion is something that's been done for a long time by people. Separation technologies are there. It's this feedstock and how you get the right materials into your plant at the right price and at the right volumes. And that's what we look at every day.
Well, it sounds like, David, it's extremely simple problem to solve, right? I mean, and also there's just a sad, I looked at some of the statistics, and there's a sad fact that so much of the materials that are, quote, recycled by the consumer end up in a landfill, right?
Right.
And it's a sad comment, because all the consumers have good intentions, and yet in many cases it doesn't end up where you'd like. Plus, the other side, of course, is that you have to compete with other people who want to use that mixed waste plastic, including the bottlers and so forth, and who recycle themselves. So it's a complex problem, right?
It is. And one of the things we're trying to do is we're trying to take, and I think that Michel and his team are doing a similar thing, is taking those plastics that are not being used right now from a mechanical recycling standpoint. So we don't want PE, we don't want, things like that are we're not trying to compete with mechanical recyclers. We're getting in things that are 3 through 7s and others that are not, that in general end up in the wrong place at the end of the day, right? So these end of line plastics that come out of MRFs, the material recycling facilities, right, where they're in general they're going to go to a landfill. We want to take those, right, because first of all, it's the right thing to do, but second of all, we can get the right volumes and the right pricing on them to go into our system. And so that we're trying to develop our systems to take feedstocks that right now no one else can do anything with.
Yeah. I want to remind you, MRFs is not something from Sesame Street. It's actually an industry term.
Yes.
There's a saying that everyone's familiar with, which is you always have to be careful about unintended consequences that you don't anticipate. And I'll give you one example and why it relates to this industry. So, all right, so they legislated that you have to have a certain percentage of ethanol, at gas stations, so forth. And ethanol is made from corn. And of course, an unintended consequence, much to the grief of people in Mexico, is it drove up the price of corn to make, tacos and everything else, right? So if you look across the technologies that the three of you, right, are practicing in your companies, what are some of the unintended consequences that at least you've had to deal with, but also society has to deal with? And maybe, Michel, I'll start with you.
Well, it's a good question. I take it the other way, the way we approach a project, especially in the chemical industry, because the boundaries are not well defined. In the fuels industry, they have LCA's methodology. Every jurisdiction has their own calculations. They have clear guidelines, objectives. So we do an LCA on our own using standardized methods. We look at circularity, but we also establish sustainability goals. So we try to find always kind of a sweet spot or an equilibrium between three to avoid getting into unintended consequences. It's a challenge the industry has. A lot of people speak about circularity, but what does it mean versus an LCA? What does it mean versus sustainability? Not everyone has the same definitions. So we try to work with clients to align our views and definitions with theirs, and try to work with different industry group or stakeholders to align on this. And that is one challenge that we find with the chemical industry, to really define what is circularity in relation with LCA and sustainability.
David or Carlos, any comments about unintended consequences?
Well, if I could just latch on to what Michel was saying, I think that's a really important point, right? So for us at Encina, we're looking at customers and end takers more as partners, right? And so, one of the unintended consequences could be that obviously we're going to allow the use of more plastics, and people can greenwash, as it were, right? That is something that we're worried about. And so what we do is try to work with customers who have a plan for what they're going to do with those materials, right? To be able to make sure that they're bringing value to their customers and making sure that these materials are looked at, rather than just putting them in a large tank with a bunch of other stuff and pretending like you're greenwashing things is a really important thing that we need to do going forward.
Carlos, any comments? Unintended consequences?
Well, from our side, Peter, there's two pieces, right? Clearly the example that you raise, which is, putting the agriculture sector, which is the producer of food, to generate large volumes of energy for combustion, never seemed to be, to me, to seem very wise or, a very, technically solid way to do it. But you do things sometimes because you have to do them. When we were facing an oil crisis and, producing nations were hostile to us, we seek the way to relieve the fuel side. And, that's where, ethanol came in, and unfortunately some of the unintended consequences, although the industry itself has greatly worked to improve and to, try to minimize by increasing both the efficiency of the ag sector as well as the efficiency of the conversion processes. So, that happens. From our side, very much like Michel, we do very rigorous life cycle analysis. We can't talk out of both sides of our mouth saying we're sustainable and environmentally friendly and aligned, with living in a better world if we either cheat or are not rigorous by how we assess, the effects that we have. And, in one of the slides that I sent you addresses this problem. And, the audience can take a look at it. We've categorized and quantified the amount of carbon that we take out versus existing methodology. And that's very rigorous, right? And that's about 88%, 88% of net carbon reduction versus the alternative, right? For this sector is significant. We, as an executive team and as a board, we always worry about the feedstock side. Our synthesis today, relies on, mostly sugars, and they're mostly first generation sugars. We're taking a serious look at second generation materials, which come from biomass and so forth. And unfortunately, the discovery is not there. And we also take a look at very novel feedstocks, beyond the sugars that we think we have the organisms to do it. So we think that unintended consequences can be there. The ones that we can identify, we're working very hard to mitigate them and either eliminating or minimizing them by developing organisms that, again, can be very selective and eat things other than sugar. That's the way we think about it. And we obviously want very transparent supply chains, accountability, so that we don't fall into the trap that David just mentioned, which is for lack of a better word, greenwashing, right? It's actually blackwashing, right? So
yeah, and Carlos, your mention of life cycle through the whole is actually a good segue to the next question I had, and that is, one of the challenges is, well, many critics claim that certainly some of these new technologies are not so innocent when it comes to reducing carbon emissions or using reasonable levels of energy when you look at the whole life cycle. I mean, I'll give one example that's not in your sector, but all right, the Chinese are pushing for all the electric vehicles, and yet they produce a huge amount of their electricity using coal-fired plants. So you do the whole life cycle thing, and it can look pretty ugly. If it was nuclear based or something else, right, then perhaps the equation would be different. So when you really look at the net effect of all those electric cars in China, it may be a lot less favorable than one would like to believe. So what would you say as a retort to these critics as it applies to, the green chemistry and circular chemistry industries?
Well, from my side, we have, it's very simple because we have nothing to hide, right? I mean, we're a soup to nuts analysis. So, we start from, all the way from the production of whatever feedstock we use to, what all those are the effects all the way to the end products, et cetera, versus the alternative. So we are a sustainable company, and we don't touch things which are non-sustainable. And this sometimes requires some difficult business decisions because there are certainly fields of profitability that can be had, but they're short term, right? In the long term, the idea is to take carbon out and take deleterious materials out of the environment. So we have to stay away from that. So strategically, we don't pursue things The example that you quoted with the electric cars is the extreme. Now, to the benefit of the Chinese, when I went to China to work with them to create this institute that weaned them off coal, which is about 8 years ago, their dependency was 80%. Okay. The country, that's 10 years ago, that was 2009 to 2012. The country has now, grown in economically, the power that they become, et cetera, the GDP, et cetera. And if you look at it, they're not at 80%, they're at 60%. Right? So 60% is still bad. It's got to be much lower than that. And, they're also building nuclear plants at a very fast rate. But, those are the false efficiencies, right? I mean, if you look at some of the biofuels which are produced, when you factor in all the electricity, et cetera, including the ethanol industry, and or the biodiesel or all those, the total life cycle effects are certainly not what anybody would think. There are lower than anticipated.
Michel, from your side, guilty as charged or innocent? Or somewhere in between?
No. We at Enerkem are extremely fond of our ESG, environmental social governance program. In fact, in Canada, we added First Nations discussions and dialogue to our decision making. I mean, the critics are not wrong. Entering this without strong life cycle analysis, clear circular and sustainability goals, and stakeholder engagement can lead to horror stories. So I think the critics are fair. Carlos explained it well. I'm sure David also, we Enerkem also, we're 3 leaders in that industry. So, I mean, these are our core value, and LCA sustainability are our core values. But I mean, we advocate a lot that there has to be a bit more guidelines around circularity in the chemical industry to try to avoid those horror stories that critics rely to. We need successes in our field.
Yeah. Well, certainly if I had $1 for every standard that people are using for ESG, I would be a billionaire. And I wouldn't be moderating this panel, right?
Start selling futures.
That's exactly right. David, any comments about that? Are you guilty as charged or innocent?
No. As Michel and Carlos said, we're also very focused on sustainability. And quite frankly, I'll look at it from another way. I'll look at it from the customer side. Our customers are not going to buy our products and or give us a large value or premium on our products unless we can show specifically that we are better for the environment, lower greenhouse gases, lower carbon, that they can utilize in their processes. So I would agree that we need to make sure there are more standards in place, and we support that 100%. But in general, we're not gonna be able to sell anything the way we want to sell it unless we have those things. And so we're very, very focused on making sure that our products are better from those perspectives than what we're replacing.
Now, my next question, I know you've just can't wait for me to ask this question because it's your favorite topic, which is the relationship between the investment community and investors with the with this whole sector, so forth. I'm joking because it really has been a challenge. It's been a love-hate relationship back and forth. They fall in love, they fall out of love, and so forth. Sometimes for the right reasons, sometimes for the wrong reasons, right? In terms of their attitude towards it. But obviously, for most of the companies that are serving green chemistry or circular chemistry, there's a significant need for capital, right? And not just for research, but obviously to build capacity, right? So, tell me, what is your own feeling about the investment community's sort of attitude towards the green chemistry, circular chemistry, industry today, both in the private and the public markets?
Well, Peter, from my side, I see, it's sort of an evolution, right? If I go back 10 years, fundamentally the returns that the financial community were looking for in solving these very difficult problems, right? One, bringing in biology, two, bringing in all the things that the people in the recycle business, et cetera, are. The product cycle for commercialization versus the financial cycle for return was just totally out of kilt. And that just created enormous, disappointment, right? The infusion of a tremendous amount of venture capital on the private side, with the expectation of a 3 to 5 year return, just proved to be, wishful thinking. And of course, that disappoints. And today, I think the financial industry has become, not all investors, but many, certainly in the private sector, to some degree in the public sector. It's a matter of information and where things are for these companies, which are, developing novel approaches and, changing the rules of the game with how you do things. I think has become more patient and recognizes that it's not a flash in the pan or something that's going to occur very quickly. There has to be a more alignment with the capability of industrializing technology versus obtaining a short-term financial return. So I think that has changed, and has also changed and put some patience in the market, because from the consumer side, there's tremendous push, which goes over to the public market that says, I will reward companies which are more aligned to, ESG than I would in the past. So, that public sector pressure, is beginning to find its way. I can tell you on the other side of my business, I still do a lot of consulting on the fossil side. 80% of my activities on the fossil side are to change fossil facilities to, quote, green them, or produce, an infusion of technology that makes the existing or planned facilities less deleterious. And then I think also the, scientists by nature are tremendous optimists, like they should be, and technologists go along. So I think there's also a reality that, the failures have brought recognition that it's not what you sell, but it's what you do. So it's the balance of the two, right? You have to get enough interest, so you have confidence in the investors to do it. But at the end of the day, you have to deliver the goods. And, it's been a rough ride, certainly for us at Genomatica and other places. But I think the society as a whole and the world as a whole, as well as the financial markets, are finding a nice equilibrium where the financial targets are better aligned with ESG goals. And there's a recognition that changing the world doesn't happen immediately, right? At least it requires a bit more patience. And we're sourcing capital that way, much different than it was being sourced 8 or 9 years ago. So there's a maturity of all sectors as a result of experience, which I think is very beneficial for the industry.
Now, all three of you are private companies, so you can only take the private, private capital markets perspective. But so I'll ask you about that. But obviously, the public markets have been open and then shut and then open and shut for companies in this whole space. And it almost seems like they get treated well and then they treated badly. Do you feel that it's the same way in the private markets? And do you believe that Carlos's comment about time frame has been a factor? Because obviously, a lot of these investment funds have 10-year lives, and so their ability to be patient, has some limitations as well. David, your comment?
So I think that Carlos is absolutely right about, the experience in those private markets, getting to understand what it takes to get some of these things done. There's always going to be the pushback, though, that they do have short cycles they're looking at, right? And so that's the dynamic that they're working through and that we have to work through together with them. But I do think that the private markets are much more experienced and smarter about these things going forward. So they know, right, the right questions to ask and the right things that they're worried about, as opposed to before where they treated everybody the same. So I think that's positive. We're getting a lot of positive feedback from the private markets as Encina, I can tell you that. But I think, again, there's always that dynamic of them wanting to make money in a certain time frame, and that's probably never going to go away. But it has been attenuated lately with the idea that, hey, fossil fuels and polymers have been around for, they figured out their niche over the last 100, 120 years, right? It didn't happen right off the bat with them either. So, you have to temper, you have to be patient a little bit with some of the newer technologies. The advantage we have is that we're using a lot of technologies that are already out there, right? And so, that helps us in terms of our timing and all the rest of it. We're moving relatively quickly because we are just making, as opposed to what Genomatica is doing and making new molecules, we're basically making, typical molecules as drop-ins for fossil-based materials. So we have a little bit easier road to answer questions and on our technology side and what we're doing. So, but again, that dynamic is always there.
And just to be clear, we make both molecules at Genomatica, right?
Yeah, right.
Molecules, and we also make existing molecules, right? So otherwise, you're going to get my
Sorry,
shareholders
Carlos.
to call me. You're going to get the shareholders to call me, immediately and ask me if I've changed the strategy of the company.
Sorry, Carlos.
We have, before I turn to the one question that we have for the audience, I have one last question for our three panelists. And by the way, I want to thank you. This has been a wonderful conversation. Really, I hope allows the audience to get a better understanding of the industry and where it's headed. And this is the relationships between companies such as yours and existing chemical companies, right? I mean, if this was a situation where, our technology, we just retrofit, we'll just retrofit your plant, right? But that's not the case here. In each case, it's a new kind of process that's being implemented. So, but all of you in one way or another have had partnerships and joint ventures with chemical companies, but it's kind of it's a love-hate kind of thing, right? Because, do you do it by yourself or do you do jointly and so forth? Any comments, each of you, on, what it's like to have, where have you chosen to have partnerships and joint ventures and why, and in what cases did you say, no, it's not worth it? Michel, do you have any comment or?
Well, sure. We try to link this specific question with the previous question. To find capital, what we've recently done, we went after what we call smart money, which were chemical companies who become our shareholder. Repsol, as there was an announcement several months ago, invested 200 or so million in Enerkem. So we try to get companies who have an appetite for investment, but also an appetite to decarbonize or get circular using our technology. So we try to do both. Over the years, we've developed partnerships that are critical also to raise capital. We have another partnership with Nova Chemicals to develop a specific synthesis route from syngas. And these are key when you go and raise capitals because they provide another validation or proof point to your model. And we find that they are key. Over the years, we've developed key partnerships. Some have been shareholders of the company, some not, but still those partnerships are very important. And it's intrinsically linked to the financing aspect.
Right. David, you were about to say something?
Yeah, so for us, what I'm seeing in the marketplace is that a lot of these large chemical companies know they have to change, right? The problem they have is these are companies that don't change easily, right? They're risk averse. They don't necessarily change easily. So they know they need companies like Enerkem and Genomatica and Encina and others, right? But they're not sure which ones they should do, right? And so what we found is they're a little standoffish. They want to be involved, right? They like to participate, but they're a little standoffish to see who's actually going to, be successful at what they're going to do, right? So especially for us, we're seeing that, we're probably better off going on our own to start with, right? We do have some significant partnerships that we're trying to develop, but those will probably take longer, right, than we might want, just because I think some of these chemical companies are standing back to see who's going to be the winners and the losers here, and who should they actually partner up with going forward. So, that's what we've seen in the large side. We're partnering very closely with a lot of our customers, right? So, because again, they have to learn what our materials are they drop-in, are there things they have to worry about, and we're doing a lot of partnership with customers. But with the actual chemical companies, it's going to take a little longer just because of they're not sure who to go with just yet.
Although I think they're going to have to, a lot of my sense will have to make choices because it's like musical chairs. There are only so many seats, right? And although I gather you're not accusing these large companies of being quick and nimble, right?
No, unfortunately, they're not. But I mean, but they're really good at what they do. But
Oh
they're
yeah,
not, right?
and they bring a lot to the party. Carlos,
they do.
I know you do both, right? You do things
Yeah, no,
and you do
you know,
partnerships, right?
yeah, we're a little bit on the, I understand fully, the points that David makes. And, of course, I spent a long time in my career trying to sell stuff that the big companies have never seen. And, it was just a matter of, how innovative and how economic the returns were and so forth, right? We do both, and we value both. We have big relationships with, as you know, very large companies. We have a very long-term relationship with Exxon. They're always looking to be creative and innovative and change things, and they have their pace, they have their way to work. But they certainly good partners, and we've had relationships with others that we have today. We have a published relationship with Covestro, which is ex-Bayer, as you know, and they're very critical and provide lots of strategic thinking and thought process. Where I have sensed the difficulty is when it comes to a massive capital decision, right? Because what happens is these existing companies have existing businesses, and they find it very difficult to capitalize an existing business for an emerging business at the level of capital return that some of this innovation trends take. But to fund technology and to fund development and to advance them, I think they're critical to the industry. And the industry can greatly benefit for both, and we're happy living in both worlds. We have a relationship which is most successful with a partner that does only renewable materials, and I think that's Novamont in Italy. We got a relationship with a big private company, which takes time to take a decision, but we just celebrated in Iowa a 65,000 metric ton per annum facility, which is going to require $300 million of capital invested by Cargill. So we like both, and I think we've learned to live and work with each other, and we're very happy for the strategic direction as well as the support from existing players. Their challenge is when they have to cannibalize one of their own businesses
Right.
for the sake of reducing carbon. That's the big challenge that they have to, they find great difficulty with.
Yeah, and you can understand that. On the other hand, in many cases, the product they're trying to protect is going to go out of business anyway. So that may be, an incentive for them to try to cannibalize themselves. Now, there's one last question which comes from Rebecca Bill, who's in the audience. And I like this question. And it says, how do you utilize your unique ESG value propositions to attract more diverse talent in a very competitive talent environment? I'll lead off by saying Societe de Chimie Industrielle, we do 2 career fairs every year where we link students from leading universities with companies. And I have to tell you, the ESG topic is one of the biggest attractions for a lot of the students who want to see the world to be a better place. So this is the last question, which is any one of you or all of you or none of you have to answer, which is, has the ESG prominence, has that helped you or been neutral with regard to hiring talented people?
Oh, it's massive. It's massive. I'm sure for my colleagues, it's the same. People join our company and you can sense the alignment of values. How do we do this? Just in our interviews, I would say 1/3, if not almost 50% of our interview is around ESG values. So I think people get a sense without us even specifically alluding to ESG, they get a sense of the core value of the company. And I think there's a better match when we do this. And we see it, the level of engagement we have in our company is incredible.
Well, we're all about that, Peter. As you know our workforce. We're lucky that we get very, very capable people who are passionate about the subject, and we share, of course, their passion. It's our job to give them the means to realize their passion and their aspirations. And we find phenomenally motivated people that in addition to the science, the engineering, the marketing, the sales, the economics, all the skills. They have this extra push, which is To paraphrase from BASF, we use it, it's, we don't only make things, but we make things better. Well, at Genomatica, that's our core, right? We make things better for everybody in a better world and a better life. And I think, youth and current talent is highly motivated by that. So it's a key recruiting tool for us. And anybody who has that passion, please visit our website and engage with us, because that's what we need. People who believe as strongly as we believe in the management that the time has come where we got to make an impact in this very, very onerous crux of situations that we are as regards to carbon and climate effects and so forth.
So David, you get the last word.
Well, I agree with both Michel and Carlos. First of all, it's important right now. I mean, workforce engagement is very, very important nowadays. I mean, it's very difficult to find good people. And so if you have an advantage like ESG and what all three of our companies have, it's a very important advantage to take advantage of, right? So if I look at our workforce, they're all very passionate about sustainability and what we're doing on an everyday basis. They have to be, because we're asking them to work very hard on these things. But it's also driving diversity within our business, right? So if I look around at our kind of our management team, at the last management meeting we had in March, we were over 50% diverse. And so, the idea around sustainability and ESG is consistent across different diversity, right? And it actually drives diversity into our business, which is a wonderful thing for us. It's lovely to see that, and very happy that we had that capability in our business.
Yeah. Well, with that, I want to first of all thank the three panelists, Carlos, David, and Michel, for doing really an excellent job. This is a great collection of experiences and diversity in terms of factors within the industry. And I think hopefully the audience found it very helpful. I also want to thank the audience, and I just remind that our next Societe de Chimie Industrielle webcast and panel will actually have a nice tie to this one, because it's about innovations in intellectual property regulation, and we have three leading lawyers, including the most recent head of the U.S. Patent Office, Andre Inigu, who will be one of the panelists. It's a core part of how the industry is successful, and they're going to look at it both from the chemical and the life science industry angles, because those are the two industries that Societe serves. So again, thank you all, and we will make sure that Carlos's missing slides get to you, and we encourage all of you to join if you're not a member, because programs like these are very helpful for people's success. Thank you very much.